I'm an old man with a ranch now, but I wasn't then. We weren't chosen by accident. We were hired because of our backgrounds, because of our training. This wasn't the public NASA. This wasn't the Apollo program the public saw on their TVs. That was a showpiece, a performance for history books. The real work happened off stage, in silence, away from the cameras, away from the journalists, away from the crowds waving flags. They couldn't televise it. They couldn't risk the public finding out what we really found out there. Because if the truth had been broadcast, if the world had seen what we saw, the story of humanity would have changed forever.
Let's start with a sentence people only whisper in the dark rooms of NASA and the NSA. The moon may not be a simple rock. For decades, researchers and insiders have repeated a claim that sounds like science fiction but refuses to die. The moon is a machine, part archive, part monitoring station, older than our civilizations, and it watches us. Journalist Moulton Howe recalls being told, early on, that abductees described the moon as hollow, filled with computer equipment, used by non-human intelligences to observe, upload, and download data about Earth like lab technicians tending a vast, multi-species experiment. Twice, she says, people connected with U.S. intelligence told her flatly, "That's absolutely right." The rest was silence. David Adair, maverick engineer with a lifetime of wild propulsion ideas and Pentagon corridors in his stories, adds a brutal, almost funny corollary. We may have been asked to leave. We went, we stomped around, and we left 200 tons, 400,000 pounds of hardware, wrappers, and yes, human waste. If you owned the moon, he muses, would you invite us to stay after that? The punchline lands like an indictment. I think we got thrown out for littering.
Abort the mission.
We treated someone else's house like a campsite. If there's a no trespassing sign up there, we installed it ourselves. And yet the deeper you look into the photographs, the telemetry, the offhand comments that slip through TV interviews, the more a pattern coheres. It's not proof in the court of law sense. It's an accumulation. Oddities that line up, claims that interlock, a chessboard of anomalies that, together, begin to sketch a shape you can't unsee.
This information will not be released to the public.
On the far side, what most people still call the dark side, though it sees day and night like ours, there's a crater named Paracelsus C. In Apollo 15, panoramic frames from July 1971, a strange geometry lurks at the edge of shadow. A long rectilinear wall, a separate block casting a crisp, right-angled shadow, and between them, a lighter feature that looks like a bracket. Decades later, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter re-imaged the same spot from about 31 miles up, orbit 2636, and the shapes were still there, clearer, sharper, undeniable as forms. The lower object measures about 423 feet long and roughly 94 feet high by shadow geometry. The upper building is approximately 252 feet long and approximately 96 feet high, with what appears to be an entrance. NASA has released over a dozen LRO frames of the area across the 2000s and 10s, And into the 2000s and 20s, the shapes persist in different lighting. Call them odd geology if you want, but they're there. One veteran researcher put it cleanly. There is a monolith on the moon. It looks like a wall, and it's on the far side. He published coordinates, frame numbers, the whole breadcrumb trail, then a peer-reviewed paper in 2016 analyzing the forms. None of that proves intent. It proves structure. Nature is a genius sculptor, but straight-edged, standalone walls, hundreds of feet long, invite hard questions, not shrugs. As a personal note to the viewer, don't take anyone's word. If you've got a few hours and a good screen, you can walk this path yourself. Apollo 15 panoramic frames, then the LRO archive. Find Paracelsus C. Roll the lighting. Note the shadows. The moon will meet you halfway.
I had always felt like in Dark Mission that the moon was really important, but there was a lot of new stuff on the moon. There were people going through old photographs because of Dark Mission. They read the book, and there are so many, hundreds of thousands of photographs of the moon, and people with different sources. There were people who were like, "Oh yeah, my granddad has a bunch of those old Apollo prints stuck in a file folder, underneath the stairs for 40 years, right? We haven't looked at Grandpa's pictures." And they would pull these out and they would send them to me on occasion. And I'd look at them and go, funny, exact same frame number on the NASA website, looks a lot different. Like there aren't any artificial structures on them.
If the moon is an archive, who owns the keys? And what happens when archives, human archives, don't match? Veteran image hounds noticed a pattern. A frame printed in the 1970s might look different from its online equivalent decades later. Contrast shifted, star fields vanished, the glitter of something crystalline in the sky muted into noise. Was it innocent calibration, curatorial sloppiness, or the more familiar, infuriating human habit of tidying away the most inconvenient pixels? On paper, the Apollo handheld photography was duplicated and stored in multiple places. In reality, people inside those vaults were sometimes ordered to destroy sets outright.
Destroy the photos.
Not duplicate, not transfer, destroy. If you believe in open science, that fact alone is radioactive. It's a hole in the historical record that begs to be filled with memory, speculation, or mischief. And into that hole pours a generation of independent researchers, ordering frames no one else wanted, and looking at what survived.
There were 4 sets of all the handheld photography taken by the astronauts on all the Apollo missions that went to the moon. So we're talking tens of thousands of photographs, and he was ordered by NASA to destroy them. Like, why would you do that? They weren't all scanned in at that time either. This is in the 1980s. There's other examples, like in Ancient Aliens on the Moon. I show one example, and this is where Hoagland was so brilliant. He got a hold of a North American catalog of photographs, and it basically was a bunch of thumbnails with a frame number. And you could order this from the archives, the NASA archives. There was various archives around. Yeah. And he's looking through, and he sees all that. This one's completely black. This one's completely black. And he thought to himself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to order the blacked out photograph. They want you to think, yeah, exactly. It just didn't come out. They left the lens cap on.
You take the lens cap off.
And when he did that, he got these extraordinary images with all this crystalline structure above the surface of the moon, and pyramids and spires and this glass stuff everywhere. They got 7 different versions of the same picture taken at basically in the same place. And he finally figured out, well, it must have been a power winder. They must have put a power winder on the Hasselblad, which they had. And then as they were traveling left to right, the guy held it down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's objects, because they saw all this glittering crystal structure and they were taking pictures of it. And they knew that the slide film was so good that what they could do is they could take a picture and you would print out a normal print and it wouldn't look too weird. It would look like stars in the background, which you shouldn't be able to see stars. But most people would say, oh, those are stars. But then when you overexpose the background, you see what's really there.
More there, yeah.
And there's actually objects that like aren't in frame 1, aren't in frame 2. Oh, in frame 3, there it is. And you can see a wire that it's hanging from. And then as they would go through the sequence, it would like rotate. You would see it from different angles. It was the same structure. So you know it's real. And it's not a scratch on the negative. And it's hanging because it's 7 different pictures over the surface of the moon. And as you look at this, it's pretty bizarre stuff. And we looked at the actual analog negatives and they were perfect. These are not scratches on the negatives. These are not scratches on the prints. They're something else. And they actually have a look of construction. Now, as an engineer, these things caught my eye. I was an aerospace engineer for years because everything was spaced properly, everything was supported properly. It looked like this was actually built by someone. And what we eventually determined, based on the work of an architect who took a bunch of these things and plotted them in computers, was that it's some sort of lattice work like this. It's made of some sort of crystal material or probably lunar glass. Now, why would you do that on the moon? Well, the answer is because it would make a perfect meteor shield. The lunar glass has no moisture in it, therefore it's almost as strong as steel is. So when you have that, that's a perfect thing, very lightweight, to build a meteor shield out if you're operating on the moon. The question is, of course, who was operating on the moon and why? What were they doing? Here's the best shot. This is, to my mind, the biggest proof. Because when you look at the moon, if you believe what NASA says, the moon has no atmosphere, it has no glass structures on it, but then that edge should be absolutely sharp and that should be absolutely black. But as you can see on this Apollo 15 shot, it's not. You can see this glowing, gauzy haze, which looks exactly like an atmosphere. It can't be there. Therefore, it's one of two things. It's either these giant glass structures, or the moon really does have an atmosphere, and NASA lied to us about that. Either way, they lied. Now, how is this supported? Well, there's other photographs of the moon taken by astronomers here on Earth, people that have telescopes, and they take lots of pictures of the moon, and they begin to notice that the moon is colorful. It's not dull and gray and bland like NASA told you it was. It actually is colorful. This is an enhanced color version, but those colors are all real. That's what came into the guy's camera when he recorded it with a 16-inch telescope. So it's purple, it's blue, there's lavender colors. Here's another shot by another astronomer of the crater Copernicus. Blue, green, red, bizarre mixture of colors. I've overdone these so you can see them more clearly, but they're definitely there, and it's definitely weird. Here's another shot of Aristarchus. Also, if you look at some of these craters in some images, like Aristarchus here, it doesn't really look like a crater. It looks like some sort of spoke wheel, spiral structure. It's weird looking stuff. So, this is what NASA wants you to think the moon looks like. They want you to think it's dull and bland and gray like you saw on National Geographic back in the day, right? Remember those shots originally from the moon? That's what they want you to think it looks like. In reality, it looks like this. This is the same picture with the color amplified. Again, you lose a little bit of tone of resolution here, but basically you've got purple, pink, red, there's some orange soil around here. There's all these weird colors. Now, where are the weird colors coming from? Well, if this glass towers idea is correct, then what's going to happen is light from the sun is going to hit these glass panes and it's going to scatter and it's going to blend together and you're going to get yellow, blue, pink, purple, lavender, just like this image here. Now, this is interesting because, God, it looks so much better on my monitor, folks, it really does. Alan Bean was the 4th man to walk on the moon. He was an Apollo 12 astronaut. He was the guy who accidentally pointed the television camera at the sun and burned out the optics so we couldn't see what was around them. But my theory has always been Apollo 11 was purely symbolic. They landed Apollo 11 in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around it. Buzz Aldrin performed his Masonic ceremony, basically consecrating the moon as a Masonic temple, and they came back home. Apollo 12 went right down in the middle of this stuff. And the reason that they knew where to go was because they had landed a surveyor there right in the same spot a few years before, so they knew the path that they could go to get through and not hit any of this stuff.
Consider the strangest acoustic rumor in space, the moon rings. In the Apollo era, intentional impacts sent shock waves reverberating through the lunar crust for far longer than expected, as if the satellite were unusually dry, rigid, or hollow. Adair points out that even NASA's own slam tests seem to hint at inner voids. Layer that over abductee testimony about internal computers, and over intelligence whispers about the moon as a monitoring station, and the old science fiction idea, an engineered satellite, bobs back to the surface. If you hate that idea on principle, good. Skepticism is oxygen, but the data is what it is, a persistent low-frequency puzzle, begging for a better story.
There was an experiment done when Neil put the packages out on the moon. There was about 7 different instruments altogether. One was a solar wind that could measure the solar winds. Another was a micrometeor impact device. Another was a pyramid of little mirrors, which is the thing that we use to fire lasers to the moon and back. So if we didn't go to the moon, how come we got those mirrors up there? I can give you a phone number to 3 different observatories that fire a laser every single day to the moon, and it bounces back off of those mirrors so we can get measurements. And yeah, we were up there. And one of the instruments they put down, they didn't put them on all 6 landing sites. I think 4 of the landing sites got it, but Neil's was the first. It was a seismograph. Pushes the rod down the ground. They leave the moon, go back up to the command module. They get out of the upper stage of the lunar module. Then they shove it back down to the moon. It flies back into the moon and crashes. When that stage crashed into the moon the very first time, the moon rang like a bell for 3 hours. The moon is hollow, y'all. And who told us? NASA. That's the irony of it. So what happened as the flights went on to Apollo 12, 13 we didn't land, we went around. 14, 15, they put bigger hydroxine motors on the retro rockets so they could fire the rockets and pick up more speed and make a bigger impact. The other lunar seismographs were put out there, and at the very last one on Apollo 17, when we fired it back in, the moon rang for 3 days. Now, if somebody was living inside the moon, I'm sure they loved that. But the moon is so odd, y'all. I can get on a blackboard if I had one up here, and mathematically I can prove to you that the Earth is not big enough to capture a moon of that size and hold it. It just can't. The weight is not there. The what we call it, the specific gravity is not there. Also, the moon is locked in a tidal lock, which means it doesn't rotate. So we see just one side of it, and that's it. That's unusual. I'm not saying that somebody flew it here, but you can catch astrophysicists in something. I've done it before. It's fun to do.
Linda Moulton Howe shares another detail from a Defense Intelligence retiree, late 1999.
I've seen a drawing. It looked like computers. So an abductee, whether is it telepathy? Were they taken to the moon? Were they taken inside? How much is literal eye-to-eye interaction, which is what humans would prefer to know, as opposed to telepathic downloads or holograms that are used instead of books, television, monitors, and a computer. Holograms are used more than anything else to communicate with Homo sapiens sapien. I'm convinced of that of my work. So the transmission vehicle for this information is not what the normal human is used to. But when you get drawings and people will point and say the moon is hollow, and there's equipment inside, it fits into what this government guy said. And if you add one more perspective, and that was from December of 1999, he was a man who was retiring from the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington after 23 years. He told me his job had been to monitor and analyze the geopolitical territorial conflict of three competing extraterrestrial civilizations on this planet and throughout our solar system. And he said that our government in the United States had proof that these civilizations have been competing with each other in our solar system and on this planet for at least 270 million years. And when I said, what is the proof? He said, Linda, if I told you, it would be too dangerous for you and for me. It's one of the most intriguing answers to a question in my entire professional career.
Why dangerous? Perhaps because provenance, who placed what and why, tips a domino chain of claims about law, territory, and human history that modern power structures are not prepared to reconcile in public. If the moon is part of that contest, a machine that arrived near geosynchronous distance and then drifted outward to today's orbit at approximately 1.5 inches per year, as even mainstream narratives allow, then someone, somewhere, knew how to park a planet-sized device, engines off, lights dimmed. Long watch begins. Not all evidence is rivets and data logs. Some of it is pattern, alignments, numerology, ritual fingerprints. It's easy to roll your eyes, and sometimes you should. But sometimes the symbolism is so on the nose that you glance at the calendar and then at the star chart and wonder who picked the date and what club they were in. In 1972, Apollo 16's lunar module was named Orion. The mission landed with the belt stars of Orion, 33 degrees above the site, on April 20th, Adolf Hitler's birthday. The landing latitude, 19.5 degrees north, a number that crops up in tetrahedral angle lore and planetary anomaly maps, like a watermark. Coincidence? Maybe. But if you were a Freemason, a German emigre technocrat, or a magician engineer in the Jack Parsons tradition, it looked like a dedication ceremony written across the sky.
We figured out NASA was basically controlled by three secret societies during the Apollo program. It was the Nazis, the Freemasons, and what we call the magicians, who were the guys at JPL, the Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley group. All three of these secret societies all believed that human beings, especially the Aryan race, was descended from the ancient Egyptian gods Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Seth. And if you look at the symbolism of NASA, the Orion patch for the Apollo program and all, it's all Egyptian. They pretend it's Greek, but it's actually all Egyptian. You had all these secret societies. Mostly the Freemasons were in charge. Yeah. But they brought in a lot of the Nazis, guys like Werner von Braun. We established. I mean, Hoagland is the one who found the picture of von Braun in his SS uniform. It's a partial picture with Heinrich Himmler passing in front of his buddy Heinrich Himmler. So, he was definitely a member of the SS.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And he brought over people like Kurt de Boos and Strughold, who were also members. And so you have these secret societies. They all believe in the same gods. Mm-hmm. They were all found themselves at NASA. They're all competing to go to the moon. Why? I think it's because they wanted to retrieve the technology of the gods that they knew had been left behind on the moon, and which we apparently had a hard time finding here on Earth, right? So it all got eroded. Yeah. So the Apollo 16 mission, right, was in 1972. The lunar module lander was named Orion, which is the same thing as naming it Osiris, because in the Egyptian stellar religion, and by the way, the guy who picked all the landing sites, Farouk El-Baz, his father was an expert in the ancient Egyptian stellar religion, where Orion and Osiris were the same thing. Yeah. So give me a break. And they landed on the moon at a very specific place on April 20th, 1972, with the belt stars of Orion precisely 33 degrees above the landing site when Osiris touched down. Now, what do you know about April 20th besides it's the day that everybody smokes pot? So they landed The lunar module Osiris on the moon on Adolf Hitler's birthday with the Masonic 33-degree Orion alignment right above the landing site. And that's the only place on the surface of the moon. Oh, and by the way, the landing site was 19.5 degrees. And I'm not making it up. I mean, it's all there.
There's another number that hums through this story, 2,160. The moon's diameter is about 2,160 miles. A precessional astrological age is 2,160 years. And at that size and distance, the moon covers the sun exactly in total solar eclipses, one of the precision-tuned spectacles of our sky. If you're a strict materialist, it feels like a huge roll of the cosmic dice, each time returning the same result. If you're hunting for signatures, it looks like calibration, as if somebody cast a coin the size of a world and placed it at just the right distance to modulate sunlight, influence tides, and regulate a biosphere like a thermostat with poetry. That reading is speculative. The number is not. Back to Paracelsus. See, the wall, the building, the bracket. The LRO kept coming back year after year, releasing new images under different local times. Each pass drew longer or shorter shadows, like a sundial reading itself. The forms didn't melt into trick light, they held. Researchers collected 7 Apollo 15 panoramics and 13 LRO frames and laid them out like a flipbook. What is it? The careful ones ask. We don't know, they answer. That humility is the right stance. And an invitation. If the moon is artificial, or at least manipulated, then surely the first to walk upon it would have known. And yet, what did we hear from Armstrong, Aldrin, and the others? The official story. Nothing unusual. But whispers tell a different tale. James McDivitt described photographing strange objects, only to have the images classified beyond his reach. Edgar Mitchell hinted publicly that humanity is not alone, and Gordon Cooper spoke of craft not of this world. And Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, remained curiously silent. Some claim he privately admitted that when Apollo 11 landed, 3 massive craft were parked on the crater's edge, silently watching. If true, then Apollo was not a giant leap, but a trespass. Why, after Apollo 17, was the program canceled? The official reason: budget cuts. Yet the Cold War was raging. Superpowers spent trillions on nuclear arsenals. Why cut the most prestigious project of all time? Unless the warning was delivered clearly. You may step here, but you do not belong. Rumors persist that both the US and the Soviets encountered anomalies. Structures, lights, even craft, that forced them into silence.
I got to talk with Pete McDivitt about a very strange thing that he saw. Talked to Edgar Mitchell, talked with just a variety of different astronauts who had all seen strange things. The top of my list was Neil Armstrong, the first human to put their feet on the moon. All the other astronauts were easy. Just started doing a search, got phone numbers, called them up, took a crew, went out and talked to them. Nobody could get a phone number for Neil Armstrong. I mean, he's world famous. He goes down in the history of the universe as the first man to step on the moon. And I'm working for Paramount to get a series on Fox, and I can't get a phone number to talk with him about the going to the moon. What is this about? Finally, I got a reference to a man who, in their teenage to early 20 years, They were the best friends, Neil Armstrong, and we'll just call this man John Smith. John Smith and Neil Armstrong were like this. They did jet training together. So I'm given his phone number to call up to learn what happened to Neil Armstrong. I'll never forget this dinner. He said, I can't talk to you on the phone. Let's meet for dinner. He said, like you, I watched Neil in that ticker tape parade in New York. First man in history to put his feet on the moon. And I remember all the days that Neil and I were learning this jet and we were the closest of friends, and I called him up. And it was soon after that ticker tape, I said, Neil, and like two buddies from 18 to 21, 22 years old, can you imagine making a phone call like that? And Neil Armstrong has no reaction. And he said, it wasn't like I was talking to my old buddy at all. It's like, what is wrong here? And Neil Armstrong said to John Smith, let's not go out. You just come over to my house. He said he got there. Hardly any lights in the house. He rings the doorbell. His old buddy, Neil Armstrong, opens the door. I mean, you would think there would be, oh man! He said he was even looking at the floor. Neil Armstrong takes him into a living room. He said there was only one light on. Neil Armstrong sat down on a sofa. John Smith sat in a chair. He said, Neil, what is wrong? And he said, Neil Armstrong didn't even look at him eye to eye, is looking down at the floor when he says, you know, when the LEM was coming down and all that dust came up and NASA Mission Control said that they'd seen some rocks and they were having to turn right at the last minute so that they wouldn't hit the rocks. There were 3 huge silver craft right at the edge of the crater, and the camera was aimed, and we would have shown the entire world these 3 big silver craft, and that's why I turned. And then the whole evening, John Smith said, I thought I would be there for like dinner like the old days. And he said it was short. He clearly, Linda, he said, you know somebody so well. And he gave me that one insight about the truth. And he gets back and he's in New York City with a huge ticker tape parade, and he's had probably to sign non-disclosure agreements. You never talk about this. You never, ever. Would you want to go out into the world and look in people's eyes and be asked to sign autographs and be on television knowing that every single word that you were saying was a lie? After you were being put up as a hero, the first man to walk on the moon, and behind you is NASA and the CIA and the NSA saying you can never talk about the alien presence on the moon.
Where I was 50 years ago today, I was leaning back against Viola Armstrong's knees. That's Neil's mother. I was in their house in Wapakoneta, Ohio, and the 7 Mercury astronauts were laying on the floor in front of me. And when Neil was sleeping in the lunar module on the moon, I was sleeping in his childhood bed. I am a member of the family. You have Viola Armstrong was my surrogate mother. That's kind of a blockbuster laid on you, but I can't let this whole opportunity go by and not say something. I know so much personal stuff about the Armstrongs you wouldn't believe it. How did that happen? To make such statements, and it seems incredulous me sitting here telling you this. I've lived with this every day of my life for the last 45 years. I asked Neil the question. We were sitting in the kitchen, his mother's kitchen. He was looking out the breakfast window. And I asked him, I said, Neil, did you run into anybody up there? And Neil was an Eagle Scout. It's really hard to become an Eagle Scout. Neil was last of the Boy Scouts. He would never lie. So he didn't want to lie to me, so he stared out the window, and it's the look on his face, and I've known him for years. So the look on his face was, he didn't want to lie, so what he said was, there are things we're going to find out later, and that's all he said. But that was enough for me. Something happened up there. He ran into something, what, I don't know. But it was enough to really alter his life. Viola was worried about it because that wasn't the son that came back from the moon, that was one that went to the moon. So she even knew something happened, but didn't allude to what. So that's, yeah, they are doctoring the photos. They are hiding something up there. What, I don't know, but let's go find out. How about that?
Even Pete McDivitt had a Hasselblad. This strange cylindrical thing comes up outside of the window of their spacecraft. He said, I took 35 photographs with a Hasselblad, highest resolution instrument you could possibly take. He said, I knew we got good photographs. I knew it was close. When they come back, everything, cameras, everything goes to various places in NASA. And he wanted to see his photos. And he went over to one of the photo labs when everything was cleared and he could. He said, I want to see my photos. And he said, the guy behind the desk said, sir, I'm sorry, they're classified. And he said, well, I'm the astronaut who took the photographs. And the NASA man went away and came back, like he went to ask somebody, and came back and said, sir, you don't have a need to know. And Pete McDivitt said, you know, what is going on here? And this is how the astronauts and all of their various stories, they would like to say, ladies and gentlemen and children of Earth, there's life on the moon, probably throughout the solar system, throughout the Milky Way galaxy. We have interstellar trade routes. We've had them since the 70s, and we're still living on a planet that makes Neil Armstrong and other astronauts lie about what they know.
The moon does not stand alone. Patterns emerge when we follow the trail beyond orbit. Whistleblowers describe complexes beneath Antarctic ice, vaults carved in basalt, sealed with doors thicker than any human engineering could require. On those doors appear symbols: the black sun, echoes of Nazi obsession with occult power. Could the moon, Antarctica, and Earth's ancient cultures be linked by the same intelligences? The black sun appears not only in Nazi lore, but in modern physics diagrams of accelerated charges and radiant fields. What if these symbols are not cultural but technological? Keys to interstellar travel, wormholes, or even manipulation of time. Atlantis, described by Plato, was said to vanish beneath the waves. Is it coincidence that the moon, with its rhythm, governs the tides? Perhaps Atlantis fell not by accident, but during a recalibration of the lunar machine. If the moon controls tides, could it also influence tectonics, weather, even human consciousness? What if the great flood myths are not stories of divine punishment, but records of lunar engineering? If there's a story behind the story, it may not be entirely alien. Decades of airship sightings, obscure clubs of tinkerers in Sonora, California, German emigres with esoteric fuel recipes, and shuttle videos, STS-48, STS-80, showing maneuvering objects that perform like piloted craft. These threads suggest that someone inside the human world got there first, or at least got there also. Think of it as a shadow space program built in the gaps between alphabet agencies and aerospace contractors, where exotic materials and classified patents move like currents no journalist can easily chart. That doesn't negate the non-human hypothesis. It complicates it, exactly the way history usually works.
So I thought to myself, what actual proof do we have that there's a secret space program? And the only things I was really aware of were STS-48 and STS-80, which showed that these are powered vehicles in low Earth orbit that appear to have flying saucer capabilities. So how likely is it that ET phoned us up and said, we're going to be in such, Whitley's friends, phoned us up and said, we're going to be in such and such a place, such and such a time, please be there to film it, as opposed to our own secret space program operating tests in low Earth orbit and getting shot at and that kind of thing, testing weapons. So I just started digging into what is the actual root of all this. And I found a whole bunch of stuff about the Sonora Air Club. A bunch of Germans came over from Germany and went to California and were trying to research anti-gravity. And then you have this airships wave in the late 1800s out of nowhere, which started, guess where? From Sonora, right?
Yes,
it started from California all the way across the country. And if you follow the pattern, it's like you start from actually Silesia in Germany, and you follow this particular guy who went out there. And then the airship sightings a couple decades later go all the way back over to Europe, as if they made a discovery of some viscous serum 525, I think they called it, and red mercury, I think so other people call it, and they took it back to Germany. And then you look at, you ever look at World War II? You ever watch the movie Patton? I was watching that on the plane on the way out. Fantastic film still. When Patton basically broke through into Germany, crossed the Rhine, he could have made a beeline to Germany, to Berlin. He could have beat the Russians to Berlin, which was the prize, we thought, the political prize, right? And he said, give me 400,000 gallons of gas and I'll be in Berlin in less than 2 weeks. And we'll beat those,
we got that
Bolsheviks. Dirty Bolsheviks, we'll beat them. He was ordered not to do that. He was ordered to go directly to Silesia. Well, what's in Silesia? It's in Poland, the Poland area. And what was there? What was there was German secret super weapons facilities, and that's where they were testing the Nazi bell. Like, what proof is there that there is a secret space program? And at the end I said, look, the only proof, you got people like Mark McClandish who talked about the alien reproduction vehicle that he saw, which I believe is a true story, and then you have the space shuttle videos, and you have a lot of other videos that have come out since, and it's like, there's a secret space program. And one thing I didn't get in there is, the manned orbiting laboratory, which Richard Doty talked about, has talked about, and that was a secret space program. Nobody knew those guys even existed. But Neil Armstrong didn't know Bob Crippen was in a parallel space program. We should have paid attention to those Major Matt Mason spacesuits, because they were real spacesuits used by the secret space program.
As more and more evidence of something untoward came to the surface, internet sleuths and UFO researchers took it upon themselves to dig deeper into the original NASA photographs and turned up some bizarre anomalies.
Now, my eye also goes to other things. This is an Apollo 17 photograph. It's an area called Shorty Crater. It's a crater named Shorty on the moon. And, I look at this stuff, and to a lot of people, it's just rocks. But I'm kind of an engineer, and I'm noticing this doesn't really look like a rock. In fact, what does it really look like? It looks
looks kind of like a head, you know? It looks kind of like, I don't know, 2 eyes, a nose, maybe a mouth, but what's that weird thing right there? That is a red stripe. So I think what this is, and what Hoagland thinks, because he found this, is that it's a robot. It's the head of a robot that's been broken off, and if you look at Shorty Crater, there's all kinds of other stuff that looks mechanical in it. And it's really, really weird. What the hell is this doing on the moon? Well, it implies that there was some sort of habitation of the moon by somebody who looked a little bit like a robot with a red painted stripe on his shirt. So these kinds of things freak me out. If you look around the moon, you see other stuff. Here's a crater near Mare Crisium that has a support structure underneath it, just like a satellite dish. So I think it's a satellite dish, not a crater. Here is a glass dome, clear see-through glass dome in Mare Crisium. Here's another one behind it. You can actually see this one through the glass of that one. That's Cleomedes F and Cleomedes FA on the lunar surface in Mare Crisium. Here's some stuff by my friend Alan Sturm, who basically found these weird little blockhouse kind of structures all over the place. This is an Apollo 17 shot. Now, NASA Select TV is really interesting. What you want to do is you don't want to watch it during prime time in the USA. You want to watch it at 2:30 in the morning USA, because that's when they show you the good stuff. This is a shot from an Apollo 17 film, and see this line, crosshatch pattern, left, right angles? Those are condos on the moon, just past beyond where the astronauts were exploring. This is another one we lost a little bit of resolution. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff up here, but down here, see these wheels? 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a 5th one here, and they have like spokes on them. This was also found by Alan. Here's another shot in context. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They remind me of the generators on the ice planet Hoth in The Empire Strikes Back. There's other stuff on the moon that's really cool. Here's one of my favorites. This is the so-called ziggurat on the dark side of the moon, or the back side of the moon. It's basically a Sumerian type of pyramid. You can see sort of a blockhouse here. There's a dome, there's an entryway, there's all kinds of weird stuff on it. And this is interesting because what this is from a first generation print. Back in the 60s, when people worked at NASA, they got pictures. They would just give them these stacks of 8x10 glossies of photographs that the astronauts had taken. Now, those pictures are a lot different than what's on the NASA websites now. In fact, if you go to this picture on the NASA website, what you'll find is that that little object, the so-called ziggurat, is gone. But what's interesting to me is that in a lot of other places, there's still stuff here. And my eye actually went up to this corner of the photograph right here, where you see a bunch of interesting stuff. And if I click on it, what you're looking at, right there is a bunker kind of cut into the side of the hill. And in that bunker is this object, which, if you look at it from the various ways I've enhanced it, looks like a domed flying saucer with some sort of landing gear or support structure. This is a bunker with the Jupiter 2 in it from Lost in Space. I don't know. That's what it looks like to me.
So, it seems as ever that the narrative is full of contradictions. But are they really contradictions? Or clues that there may be more than one or even two space programs, and that these space programs are run by different groups with different agendas and technology? One thing is clear: we have definitely had some help along the way, and man's discoveries in places like Egypt and Antarctica only provoke more questions.
They can see that there are black rectangles up and down on what would be the left side of this 18-foot thick. You can't even imagine the engineering of how you open up and close anything that is 18 feet thick. And he said they just would touch the door. That's all, with their index finger. Just touch. And whatever this is, like the walls are reactive, the door would open. They would walk through, and he went through many of these doors. And he said, you turn around and you're staring at a perfect circle, a ring with 12 arms, with two 90-degree angles at the ends of each of the 12 arms. So I had taken a whole lot of images in a notebook. No front loading, no description. I just said, see, I have some geometric patterns. Can you just go through and see if there's anything that you recognize? He's turning my spiral notebook, and he stopped and he said, this is it, Linda, right here. And it's the black sun. The 20th and the 21st century, humanity has heard of the black sun in relationship to Adolf Hitler. He chose that particular pattern to represent his Nazi regime. He chose also another ancient symbol, the swastika, that he put on a kind of an angle, so it danced on a point as opposed to flat. But when the Navy SEAL picked that out, the first thing that jumped in my head was, what is the antecedent here? Hitler is 1930s to 1940s. When you start reading about where does the swastika, where does the black sun pattern first emerge on the planet, you're going back centuries. Swastika has been huge in India. The black sun is associated with all kinds of things, both Mesopotamian and North American. Why? What is there about 12 arms coming and doing 290-degree angles inside of a perfect circle? From your country in England, one of the most valuable emails I have ever received. He is a mathematician by education, but sort of independent, not with a university. He sends an email that simply says, look at the illustration below and its resemblance to the black sun. This, and then its color. It's a color representation of a Purdue University physics professor's lecture, videotaped and put on the web. And the subject, if you have electric charges and you accelerate electric charges, they now know that electric charges will begin moving near the speed of light and then at the speed of light. And as they make that acceleration, they go from charge existence, think of a photon, imagine it. They become a sphere. And physicists illustrate the motion from a charge accelerating to the speed of light and then becoming surrounded by electromagnetic fields in the shapes of sphere. The physics illustration is exactly like the black sun. They can have 24. You will find it, the physicists will put 24 instead of 12. But the very idea that this could be the antecedent, that this is the reason for the black sun pattern, that it is a law that gets non-humans, advanced intelligences that move through the universe, point to point, bending space-time, as Einstein wrote. Why would they have this carved on the back of these doors in Antarctica if it wasn't something hugely important to their existence? And now I am studying physics, accelerated charges, the laws of physics at the speed of light, which is when time stops. If you can accelerate to the speed of light, not only does time stop, but so does space. What is a moment without time or space? One answer that I got recently in talking with somebody about that has just set my mind on fire. I was talking with a man about this, who he has work that he doesn't want described, so I'm just a man. He said, when photons move at the speed of light, from the photon's point of view, there is only one universe, the size of one photon, and there is no time, and there is no space. Mike, we are beginning slowly to be introduced to how, almost abusively, humanity for eons has deliberately been kept dumb and blind, because apparently our original creation was for labor.
Yeah.
If we are somebody else's android, we've become quite intelligent about our relationship in some ways with the physical laws of the universe. But the huge mysteries, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? What exactly happens at the speed of light? And that every day of every place in the universe where there are suns, photons are moving at the speed of light everywhere in this universe. And if you can entangle photons, and you could place entangled photons from our sun to a sun 13 billion light years from here, this is one of the magic pieces now that I'm trying to grasp. The theory says if we could do that, if an advanced intelligence can do this, you have instant communication across 13 billion light years. You're not waiting for the speed of light. It's not comprehensible. And yet, this is where all of this is pushing. And when I'm at a conference and a physicist comes up and says, I've been following your work and I want to share something that'll be important. Or a Marine comes and says, I've heard your discussions about Antarctica and I know a colleague and he feels that all of humanity should know what it is that we have been on missions about. Because if Antarctica is 34 million years old in terms of having to go back to where there was no ice, and how could you build multiple sites that were 62 acres each? How could you do that under the ice with the ice there? Now, maybe it's possible, but the bigger logic is whatever it was that took Antarctica from tropical to ice buildup in 1 million years, meaning we're talking lots of ice buildup in that 1 million years. What was it that hit Wilkes Land? And who was it that built all of those 62-acre structures? And they built them so large, humans don't need 80-foot ceilings.
How is this connected to the moon? I hear you ask. Well, for most of us, the moon feels eternal, as if it has always been there, pulling at our tides and lighting the night sky. But what if it hasn't? What if the moon was introduced into Earth's orbit? Imagine the sudden arrival of a planetary-sized mass, the shock to Earth's rotation, the tidal bulges ripping across the crust, earthquakes and tsunamis racing around the globe. Even a slight change in the Earth-Moon balance could have been enough to dislodge the planet's outer shell, sliding continents like loose skin over the mantle beneath. This is what some call a crustal pole shift. a reorientation so violent that entire civilizations could vanish in days. Ancient flood myths may not be stories of divine wrath, but memories of this event. Skies darkened, oceans rising, whole worlds erased. And scattered across cultures we find whispers of a time before the moon. Myths that suggest humanity remembers the shock of its arrival. So we are left with a question that shakes our foundations. If the moon was placed here, was it to save the Earth or to reset it?